Hello and welcome to Escape with me, Simon Calder. This is the podcast that takes you to the four corners of the world, and I'm glad to say that I'm joined today by adventure guide and photographer Paul Goldstein.
Afternoon, Simon.
Coming up, Paul's going to be conducting what he claims to be a masterclass on travel photography, trying to convince me that it's worth taking more than a smartphone on your travels. Many miles away, our 48 hours destination is Kiev, and I'll bring you the best of the city in about 48 seconds. And British Airways staff are threatening to go on strike. What could it mean for your trip this summer? But let's start, Paul, I suggest, with the talking point. Foreign Office travel advice. Is it fit for purpose? Now, of course, the Foreign Office takes the welfare of British citizens very seriously. They want to say to us, look, we think most of the world is a good and safe place to go, but just do this, do that, and you probably want to steer clear of these places. And that seems a perfectly reasonable thing for any government to do indeed. The Americans, the Canadians, the Australians, the New Zealanders, and everyone else does exactly the same. So, you've got a problem with it.
I've always had a problem with it. It's generally the State Department that comes out with a stipulation,
this
and the others,
the US,
the US, and the others sort of bend over and say, yeah, okay, well, we all really ought to do the same thing. And then the British always peddle the same line. They have done it for years. The safety of the British citizen is paramount. Which, you know, you're talking about often in a country which has any number of problems. Generally, terrorism is not one of them. And to me, it's borderline racism at best. And no, it is. It's all that matters. It's like the reports when, there's a huge disaster, 2 Britons. You know, that's all you're going to hear about. No, it's a massive, massive problem because there's no regimentation about it. It's like, Sri Lanka recently, the Daesh or whoever it was, they chose a soft target, and it was an absolute tragedy. And after about 2 weeks, they throw a travel ban on it, which is what it is they obviously said to the Sri Lankans, here's a quid pro quo for you. You're going to have to improve your safety, no end. And if you don't, we'll throw a travel ban on it. So it's just used as a rather devious weapon. And since tourists are now allowed to sort of retreat rather spinelessly behind their insurance policies, it makes people destitute. But the real problem is when you do it at an area which has radicalism, and they've done it in Indonesia and Kenya and all sorts of places, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, what happens is the tourists don't come, the dollars don't come, the money doesn't come, there's unemployment, and what does that breed? It's nonsense. Why don't we get travel bans in Israel? If it's a geographic thing, in Indonesia there's 1,400 islands, and after the Bali bombings, for like 3 or 4 years, you couldn't travel, non-essential travel. Well, you ask most people, I actually think your holiday's pretty essential, actually. It really is. It's this pompous term, non-essential travel. You can't go, and then it stuffs everybody. Yeah, Israel, you're fine to go to. If that was anywhere else, they'd throw these bans on like confetti. They're politically motivated, they're ethically derelict, and they need to take a good look at themselves.
Funnily enough, the Foreign Office doesn't completely agree with you, Paul.
Strange that.
They say we keep our travel advice under constant review and update it as quickly as possible if we're aware of an incident that might significantly affect Britain's travelling or living in the area.
In the area. I suggest some of these go back to sort of O-level geography, because, I mean, seriously, some of these bans have affected whole countries with millions of square miles, and it's a blanket ban for all of it. I'm not saying it's completely out of order. I'm not saying they don't get some of it right, but they frequently get it wrong. And it makes a lot of people destitute and defeats the whole object of it.
Well, they say, we know our travel advice can have a knock-on effect on trade and political considerations, but we don't let this determine the advice we give. The safety of British nationals is our main concern. And they will warn against...
Answer Israel, then. Sorry, please. Please, there are rockets being fired into Israel. But I looked yesterday. I could not see a travel ban banning tourists from going. I mean, if we're talking in terms of distance, anywhere in that country, it's nonsense.
Well, as I say, they would absolutely reject the idea that there's anything political motivating their travel advice. Here we are. In cases of terrorism, we will advise against travel only in situations of extreme and imminent danger where the threat is sufficiently specific, large-scale or endemic to affect British nationals severely.
So I give you Indonesia as the example. 12, I think it's 1,324 islands or whatever. So when they had that ban in place, do they honestly think it's unsafe to sort of take 3 boats to one of those outer islands and yet you can't get insurance for it? You know that's deemed as non-essential travel. I mean, the whole thing's nonsense.
Well, it obviously is not regarded as nonsense by the travel insurance industry, because they say whatever the Foreign Office says goes.
It's a lovely little loophole for them, isn't it?
Okay, I'm glad we've got off to such a strong point, but surely the crucial thing is that I think there's a perfectly good argument for having no travel advice whatsoever.
Yes.
Let the traveller take responsibility for themselves.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
well, no, it's like travel insurance. If it's that, don't buy it if you're so afraid of losing it. I mean, really, the only time you're not covered for insurance, correct me if I'm wrong here, is in an act of war, isn't it? This is normally the one that when you're abroad, if there's suddenly while you're there's an act of war.
All depends on your policy and what the wording is.
There's not many travel policies.
Well,
I mean, goodness me, having worked in adventure travel for however many years, we look at those policies with a great deal of vigour. However, I haven't seen one that, have you been somewhere where there's suddenly been an act of war? I'm not pertaining to you, but has there been one?
I've been to, for example, to Central America in the early 1990s when it was all quite lively, yes.
Yeah.
But I think if you are a straightforward British traveller and you're going to one of these places and it does all kick off, then they will have to look kindly upon you, because they've got the Financial Ombudsman Service, which in my experience will look at travel insurance advice, and we've got to get back to the Foreign Office advice in a moment, but they'll have a look at the Foreign Office advice and the travel insurance policies, and they say, look, travel insurance companies got to look after Paul. Please be kind to him. But is any country doing travel advice better than our own government then?
No, I don't think any of them are doing it particularly well. I really don't. And there seems to be, it's very, very seldom you get a situation with a country that is declared a hotspot. I mean, Sri Lanka being recent. And normally the ones you listed, the State Department, Australia, New Zealand, they almost always close ranks behind it. And then really destroy that country's economy. Because a place like Sri Lanka or a place like Indonesia, a place like back in early 2000s, Kenya, they are so dependent on the tourist dollar. And this just destroys it. And it really, I've never heard anybody in a country where I visited after there's been a ban who has said, thank goodness it's been so good that there was a ban. And we've really benefited from it. All of our tourism services, of course they haven't. It's disastrous.
Well,
there doesn't seem to be any real thought. There's certainly no compassion.
Well, it's obviously decided ultimately by the Foreign Secretary, and we're in the extraordinary position of the next Prime Minister of the UK being a former Foreign Secretary, which it will be interesting, and maybe we'll get a chance to ask them about the Sharm el-Sheikh travel advice. It's just coming up to 4 years since the airport there was banned for security concerns. You're listening, of course, to Escape with me, Simon Calder, and the adventure guide and photographer, Paul Goldstein. Time for our city break slot, and I've just spent 48 hours in Kiev. Is it somewhere, Paul, that you've
No, I haven't.
I
was interested when I saw that. I know its history. I know it's battle history. The biggest ever tank battle, actually. I bet they had a Foreign Office warning then. I'm sure of it.
But it's the Second World War, so presumably
I don't think they were around then.
Yeah.
It may as well started it. Nascent FCO advice after the tank battle at Kiev.
Well, tell us just a little bit about that for those of us who missed it.
Largest tank battle of the Second World War, perhaps the largest tank battle ever.
Most people would think that was taking place in Stalingrad, no?
No, I think it was Kiev.
Okay. All right.
There's a bigger battle in Stalingrad. but I think there were more tanks involved. Maybe just specifically tank-centric battle.
Okay, well, things have quietened down just a little bit, and it's a little bit easier to get to.
You're saying, isn't it? Yeah.
So you can fly on British Airways from Heathrow to Kiev, but only, would you believe, until the end of October. It's one of the routes they have ditched, along with St. Petersburg. You could go to from Gatwick on Ukraine International, from Stansted on Ryanair, also from Manchester on Ryanair. All those flights will end you up in Boryspil Airport, which is out in the sticks a bit. I personally recommend Wizz Air from Luton, because that takes you to the much nearer in Giuliani Airport, which you can basically walk into the city centre from. And once you're in the city centre, of course, you'll need somewhere to stay. You've got two great Soviet hotels. I love former Soviet hotels.
Do you?
Yes, of course I do, because they're just thread by. They speak of the kind of mid-20th century. They are uniformly grim, but in a very alluring way. A bit
So it
like
reminds you of home.
maybe. Thank you very much, yes. Now, the Hotel Ukraine is the grand one. That's going to cost you a good £60 a night. But if you go to the other end of Independence Square, you can stay in the Kozatsky cash only for £27 a night. It's very good. You'll probably want to have some Soviet memorabilia. You can go to the Courage Bazaar. That's on the eastern side of the city. Worth going out there on your way back to Boryspil Airport. And in terms of restaurants, well, Crimean food is a great part of the culinary pride and joy of Kiev, because of course Ukraine owns Crimea. Unfortunately, it is under Russian control at the moment. So if you want some Crimean food, you've got to go to Kilim in Independence Square. You can get chebureks, which are small pancakes. You've got beef, lamb, mushrooms, cheese, any combination thereof, and Crimean borscht. Well worth eating.
Russian memorabilia. Sorry, you're going to
Soviet.
shopping for Soviet memorabilia. So that's your Khrushchev dolls and all of the stuff, is it? All the hackneyed stuff.
Yeah, Khrushchev. That's a little bit.
Well, that's what they were. You know,
Yeah.
What did someone say? I can't stand Russian dolls. They're so full of themselves.
Right. Okay. The great sight is another Soviet one, which is the Motherland Monument on the hill. Very spectacular. And then I'm surprised, Paul, you haven't mentioned chicken Kiev. So let me mention.
Yeah, that's right. If you ask most people what they heard of Kiev, they talk about chicken with bread on it.
And you talk about
breadcrumbs.
tank battles.
Tank
But,
battles, I think, is more interesting than a poultry dish.
I'm going to talk about Check-in Kiev. If that's not too Alan Partridge.
That's a horrible link.
Yes.
Isn't it? Yeah.
So this is Kiev's main airport. It simply does not work. If you are flying out
I've
of
heard this. That it is an abominable airport.
it is quite the worst. So allow 3 hours. I allowed just over an hour. I got out of the cab, and they immediately said you'd missed your
Weren't
flight.
you hitching, Simon?
Thank you. It was a long story involving quite a lot of stress. But anyway, I got there. I thought, hour and 5 minutes early, great. I mean, time, they said, no, you're not. Then someone else said, you are, but you've got to pay €15. And then somebody else said, here's your boarding pass. But that was just the start of my problems, trying to get through the queues. It's one of these airports, you would have seen them before, where you have to go through security before you're actually allowed into the building.
That's it. Yeah, it's a disaster.
And then you get checked by absolutely everyone.
Just how many times do you need the marigolds in these airports?
Thank you very much. Well, talking of which, and these two burly chaps on the apron, as I was waiting for my delayed flight
Bear in
to
mind
be
the
immortal. Yes, and they were embracing, I thought, and this was actually, every baggage handler is supervised by a security official, and as soon as they've loaded some bags in, then the security official comes around and
they're not stealing anything.
No, not that they would.
No, of course not. No, baggage handlers have never done that anywhere in the world. No. Kiev Airport, an interesting surprise to round off your trip to. Can I just bring you up on the drama you had getting there? Now, I've travelled with you a few times, and you've always said, no, I'll do it myself. Now, witness trying to get a train ticket in India, trying to get across Nairobi. You were like all at sea, weren't you?
Well,
to sort of mix travel metaphors, but you completely were. So clearly you haven't got any better at this.
No, I have. It was all very straightforward. Getting out to the airport, I thought, great, the direct train, the express to the airport, stops at a place called Danitsa. And I noticed that the metro had a station called Danitsa. So I thought, well, obviously they will be co-sited. They are 3 miles apart, which is quite entertaining when you haven't allowed very much time. But there we are. I survived, and I strongly recommend Ukraine, particularly if you want a budget trip, because the price of everything seems to halve when you step off the plane, as opposed to most places these days.
And 60 quid for a room, that's all right, isn't it?
27.
Oh, 27,
That's
sorry,
what
yes,
I paid,
yeah.
£60 a little bit.
£60 sort of top of the scale.
Yeah, exactly.
60 to 20. There's not many European cities. I looked for a room in Vancouver the other day, and someone said, this one's very good value, $395 Canadian dollars. That doesn't sound great value for me.
No, that's even with the Canadian dollar being punier than the American one, it's still what, 200, 250 quid, yeah. Right, there we are. These days, I've brought my smartphone along because we're going to talk about travel photography, and this is full of travel photography. Marvellous pictures.
You've always been an extraordinarily good photographer, Simon.
Marvellous pictures that I've
You had
taken.
the oldest digital camera in the UK, I think, at some stage. It had 1 megapixel of memory, which was too much for you, I think, still.
So look, it is time for you to try to convince me that it is worth taking more than a smartphone when you're going travelling. Why, when we have reached the almost the end of the second decade of the 21st century, when every picture I take on this is going to be all right, why would I go to lugging around lots of kit in order to take pictures when I can...
Well, firstly, from my point of view, you've answered that yourself. I'm not interested in taking photos that someone would look at and say, that's all right. Okay, that just, that's as bad as somebody saying, yeah, that's nice, or the worst thing of all, when you're desperately chuffed with something, you show it to them, they say, yeah, I see what you've tried to do here, is the absolute worst euphemism, which means it's awful. Or this would really appeal to some. Yeah, in other words, not to me. Look, there's no such thing as there never will be, but certainly I like to photograph. Wildlife is my big thing, but there's never any such thing as a perfect photograph. But it's for me, a very seductive mistress. I love spending hours, days, weeks, months, even years with particular species. I prefer four-legged to two, and you need a certain level of kit. And I'd love to say, when I look at great photographs, that it's just the photographer, not the camera, but it's not. I know digital or phones, cell phones. You even can take raw files now. They go up to 24, 26 megapixels. There's any number of things you can do with it. And I saw the back of a hardback book the other day was taken on an iPhone, but it was a very favorably lit situation. And it's always in in fairly standard conditions. If the light's okay and your subject is quite close, they're going to be fine.
Right.
If you want to put it into a magazine, you want to blow it up large, that's when it's going to start suffering. I mean, that's simple physics. You carry a 4-kilo lens with you, it's this sort of length of a Stinger missile, against a phone that's half the size of a packet of 20 cigarettes. It's, obviously there's going to be a pitfall, somebody on it. I think the reason why the phones now are so successful, it's the ease of which people can then transpose to almost the porn of Instagram and everything else on social media. And that's why we are deluged with so much absolute dross. I mean, for years, I'm sure there were other nationalities, but Japanese were ridiculed by it because it was always them and something else, wasn't it? It was me and the fire extinguishers, and it's me and Stonehenge, and it's me. And it's not now. That is what 95% of Instagram is. And that's not to say it's an effective medium. And now you have what has spawned, the utter spawn of the devil, is these Instagram influencers. I mean, if ever there were people who can't get a real job, that's them. Lazy, talentless, utterly useless, and they feel simply because they spent a few quid on an iPhone or something, they can become this influencer. I'm interested, when you went to Kiev, did you check that any influencers had been there? Did you take their advice did you look at their abominably awful photographs before? You didn't, did you?
Let me appeal
to
anybody who's listening who counts themselves as an influencer. You're very,
go and
very
get
welcome.
A proper job.
You're very welcome to come and talk to us on Escape with me, Simon Calder, but not necessarily with Paul Goldstein. So it sounds to me as though you're kind of accepting that there used to be...
No, it's people said, the bicycle will never catch on. No, come on, these things are here to stay. They really are. And they get smarter and smarter. I think we may, similarly with cameras, when digital cameras, I was a late convert to digital, not because I'm an absolute dinosaur or Luddite. Well, perhaps I am, but I just didn't think the standard of the image was good enough compared with an old slow roll of Fujichrome. And then suddenly it was, so I moved over to it. And they have many, many advantages that transpose from the camera to the phone that you can quickly delete, you can take as much as you like. A camera battery lasts a great deal longer than a cellular phone, particularly if you're on all the social media channels. What do they call them? Platforms. Platforms grow up. But they are here to stay, just quality-wise. You know, take it out of a target, your quarry inside sort of 5 or 10 meters. You know, they're going to be found wanting. I haven't seen a sports photographer at Wimbledon, at Twickenham, or any of the major sporting venues at the Cricket World Cup at the moment using a smartphone, except maybe just to do an interview or something. They're useful for many things.
Well, but there used to be a photographer saying F8 and be there.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
F8, the aperture
pikey,
setting.
inbred baloney, peddled out by these sort of parochial camera clubs. It's absolute nonsense. I can't remember the last time I took a photo at F8. You know, the reason I hump round, I have physio appointments most weeks with my shoulders in tatters, is because I'm
Lucky
humping around
physio.
these huge lenses. And the whole point is that they have these shallow depths of field. So when you take a subject, this doesn't work great on radio, but when you take a subject, it kicks out the background. F8 it's a sort of safety first, frankly, a sort of traditional phrase, which that doesn't carry much weight with me.
Okay, how much roughly for all this gear that you carry around? How much would it cost me to set myself up as a proper photographer?
As opposed to an improper one. Well, generally, the first advice I always give is if you want to use some big, heavy, amazing kit, whether it's Nikon or Canon or whatever, hire it. I always say hire it. Why carry huge stuff around? When you're going away for a few days, think, I might give this a whirl. You can hire the camera and the lenses, and then you can let your escape audience know how great they are and probably get it for a very good concession. So that's the first advice I always say. I haven't bought a long lens for 10 years. I hire them every time. But yeah, it's going for a really good kit, a decent camera SLR, it's going to cost you a couple of grand. The other advice I always give is buy it secondhand. The one area of photography which has taken a nosedive is the compact cameras. Because it is the phones that have just completely cut their lunch, understandably, because really there's not enough of a jump up between that and the SLR. Okay,
what photograph, briefly, are you proudest of having taken?
It's a good one. And having taken, it would be six figures. It's difficult to actually, but you're putting me on the spot. A number of years ago in a storm, if I just sort of said storm, open branch, beautiful female leopard, rainbow, and you sort of conjure that thought up in your mind, I think if I had it on the spot, quite literally, I would probably say that. Yeah.
Okay, Paul Goldstein, thank you very much.
It's available on my website for a very reasonable fee.
Now, we've got to cover our destination of the week, so that is open to you. It is the country of Kenya, but I'm going to have to narrow it down. Coast or countryside? Or city?
Countryside. Coast or bush, I think.
Okay.
The bush, always. Don't get me wrong, I think it's the second longest reef in the world, runs down Kenya and Tanzania's coastline. It's wonderful. I love the coast. However, I'm not a coastal person as much. If very simply, the best wildlife viewing in the world is in Kenya, and it's in some of those conservancies where they're properly managed, the money is audited, it's not wasted, and a lot of stakeholders and tourists benefit.
For conservancy, do I read Big Zoo?
No, not in the slightest. No, the complete opposite. A big zoo can be a cheetah with a few cubs being corralled by far too many minibuses where there's no legislation, no control. No, a conservancy is where landholders and one or two tourism partners have come together and said, right, it's 400 acres minimum per guest. So it means you don't have those ghastly scenes. You're allowed to drive off-road. And, well, I think the best example is that it's, the only growing populations of lions in Africa, frankly anywhere, are in these conservancies. So yeah, it's nice to say something about a vulnerable creature that's actually positive.
Right, time to look at our warning of the week, and one of the airlines that could fly you to Kenya, to Nairobi specifically, is British Airways from Heathrow, except that they are facing a whole series of possible strikes. So let me just briefly run through what's happening. The pilots, the cabin crew and the ground staff are for the first time negotiating over pay together. They say, look, British Airways, you made over £1.7 billion pounds profit last year. That's all thanks to our excellent work, so therefore we want more of a share of that. British Airways says, we've offered a pay increase of 11.5% over 3 years. That's way ahead of inflation, so we think we've been pretty generous. Even so, the pilots have announced a ballot that's going to end on the 22nd of July, and if form follows the usual experience with these things, you will find that there will be a majority for strike action. At that stage, they can call a strike and there will be no strike action because of the industrial relations rules until the 5th of August at the earliest. It may well be, though, as often happens, they'll say, right, we've got 98% voting in favour of a strike, we've got to do some more talking. However, anything which even threatens strike action has an effect on people, on the airline's bookings, because people want some certainty, which means that arguably it's a good time to buy flights on British Airways because demand is weaker than it might be because people are concerned about whether they will actually get to travel. My view is that we've seen many strikes on British Airways over the years, and most people have got to travel. That might mean that if you want to, you take advantage of what I think is the bargain of the week. Left or right when you get onto an aircraft, Paul?
Right.
Yeah. Well, me too. But so narrow is the gap between business and economy in the summer. I've looked at British Airways, London, Chicago for a week from the first Saturday in August. It's £1,042 return in economy, which is an awful lot. But instead of paying £8,000 return in business, it's £2,240. So therefore, if you are able to travel in the summer, you will find this is perhaps the lowest that you're going to see Club World prices, and worth doing it, I perhaps imagine, for a flat bed. But really, it's only going to be a benefit on the way back because it's a daytime flight going over. And whether your sleep's worth, £1,200, I'm not sure, but you do get lots.
I mean, I'm always interested on this club class business, because if you speak to someone who's paid that what seems like an eye-watering amount, you say, do you think it's worth it? They always say it is. Of course they do. They don't feel shortchanged. I would always struggle. What I would say is, and they're normally a little quiet about this, but I think the best deals you ever get on turning left is when you turn up at the airport. And I always ask. I say, look, anything going on, if you got anything, and frequently they're not fools, they're trying to fill these seats always, and I think the best I ever got on a British Airways flight was to where was it to? It was to Sao Paulo, so that's 11-12 hours. I mean, it's a good long flight, and I had a World Traveller Plus seat, and they said I think it was £290.
Ooh,
yeah, but that was on the day, and clearly it had just. And I checked in a bit late, obviously because I'd had dramas like you getting to a simple airport like Heathrow, Terminal 5. But that was extraordinary. What a bonus that was! But then frequently I've asked, they say, "Oh yes, we have a very good deal. It's only £1,800. But it'll just entirely depend on the load, and I wouldn't recommend this as a standard protocol."
You were in World Traveller Plus Premium Economy, which
Yeah, well, no, I booked that so far in advance. It was very, very not a great deal more.
Well, look, that's all for now, but we'll be back soon to help you plan your escape from Paul Goldstein, apart from anybody else, in the next podcast, where Paul won't be joining us. 500 years old and still alluring. No, not me. Havana, beautiful Cuban capital, is our destination for 48 hours, and you'll get all the inside information you need on family travel. From me, Simon Calder, and from Paul Goldstein, goodbye.
Bye.